Well, wait a minute. If this is a presentation on the Center for Treatment, we need some bodies up here. Who are the right folks to come on up? May the odds be ever in your favor. Come on down. Don't be afraid. It'll be a fun and good conversation. It's about the future. Okay, welcome everybody. So today we are convened for a work session to discuss the Alaska Center for Treatment. It's Friday, June 14th. It is 1:01 p.m. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Salatow.
Christopher Constant on the phone. We have Mr. Salt. Are you there?
Randy Salt here.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Present.
All right. Is anyone else on the phone? All right. Not hearing anyone. So as a matter of predicate for the conversation, when the MLMP transaction occurred, there was a consent decree that was agreed to because Providence filed and decided they were party to the transaction and the RCA agreed. And the terms of the consent decree were that we would make an investment of $15 million into what's come to be called the Alaska Center for Treatment, which would establish and stand up additional treatment beds, drug and alcohol treatment beds for our community. And in the process of the last several years, the Assembly authorized the purchase of the Golden Lion Hotel, and it is currently being used as a housing intervention in our community, housing units. And we've invested approximately $10 million out of the $15 million consent decree in readying that building for the purpose of the Alaska Center for Treatment. And while we wait to get it up, it is housing. So this conversation is bringing the Assembly up to date on where we are in the conversation. As I understand it, we have through approximately the middle of October of 2025 to turn the lights on, open the door, and welcome a client into the treatment center. And so while that is a little bit of time, it's not a lot of time. And so it means we have to start turning our attention and focus on this project to make sure we land that plane in the right manner in the right time. And so with that, we have from the Health Department.
Acting Director Kimberly Rash.
Tamaya Liebersbach, Administration Manager.
Thank you. And they're going to be walking us through a conversation in regards to the Alaska Center for Treatment. So, Ms. Rash.
All right. So I'm going to probably rely on Tamaya because Tamaya was here before my time at the Health Department, and she has a little bit more historical knowledge of the original RFP. As well as kind of what went into that. So I will have her take it away, talk a little bit about the history, and then I will fill in a little bit of where we're at currently.
Thank you. So the Health Department initially began working on the request for proposal for Alaska Center for Treatment in 2021. That RFP can be found on the history area of the purchasing website, or if you would like copies, we can certainly email those out to you. So in 2021, we put out a request for proposals in April. And we did a walkthrough of the facility with various providers. The request for proposals was largely based on a 2019 needs assessment that had been done by the Health Department around kind of gaps in treatment services in our community that could be filled by a provider at the Alaska Center for Treatment. In the request for proposals, there was a certain amount set aside for the winning provider to basically spend on renovations of the facility. It was a little over $2 million. And then there was $500,000 in funding for basically to support the operations of that provider in the first year, with the idea that that might continue for a few years. But obviously with a 1-year budget cycle, it was only guaranteed in the first year. So we put that out. We did not have any proposers at that time. And if you think back to April of 2021, we were having an election. there was a lot of, we were in the middle of the pandemic. There were a lot of changes. We were in a really different landscape than we are today. If you're at all familiar with the 1115 Medicaid waivers, which are really around treatment, they were very new, a lot of unknowns about what reimbursement rates would look like under that waiver. And so feedback that we received from kind of the community was that, there wasn't enough funding attached because of that unknown at the time, really, that some of the pieces in the RFP were a little too specific and that the providers would like to kind of develop the project a little bit more themselves. And then I think that there was a general concern that the Golden Lion may not be a facility that the municipality owned going forward because of kind of the election that was going on at the time. So that's the history there. And then as Chair Constant mentioned, the Golden Lion was then, after being vacant for a while, turned on as a housing project that is low-income housing for individuals coming out of homelessness. And that's run by Henning under a lease agreement held by the real estate office. That lease agreement is up at the end of this month and then goes to a month-to-month basis, which really gives us the ability, as we put out a new RFP, to identify a provider to, kind of have some flexibility in terms of when we have a provider and when we work with Henning to, transition those individuals to different housing and more permanent housing, so that then the provider under the RFP can work with the municipality on renovations for the facility. So the new RFP process is going to start with some requests for information to get feedback from the treatment provider community on what needs they really see in the community and some other things like that, so that that information can then inform what is put in the request for proposal process. We'll be starting that RFI process most likely sometime in July and have that out for a while, with the aim to get to an RFP more in the fall. And then, of course, have the renovations completed, the money spent, and the doors open by October of 2025. So that's my summary.
Go ahead.
And just to add on to what Tamaya had mentioned is we are currently, again, working on that RFI. We will put out 2 RFIs, one for more of the treatment side and one for more of the transitional housing side of it. We will keep those out so that we can have a really robust RFP placed out into the community. One of the statements made previously was to make sure it's nationwide. So we will make sure that it is nationwide so that we can get a provider. Once we have a provider, then I think that's when we really can look at renovations and what that will look like. In the meantime, the health department will need to reach out to our partners in M&O and kind of just get an overview of what that's going to look like time-wise. How much money will that cost? Just looking at currently what the location looks like inside. And in addition to the current lease that is in place with Real Estate and Henning Inc. that does end at the end of this month, but we are looking at a month-to-month option to activate that so that we don't displace individuals out into our community. And so we will continue to work, we will have to work with Henning Inc. to decompress that location. And then just make sure that it's vacated when it needs to be so that the renovations can start and then we can move forward. We do know from the CFO that we do have to spend the money, get it all turned on. So that is a high priority for us and for the municipality as a whole.
So it's an unusual circumstance when you have the CFO saying, spend the money, spend the money. This is not normal, but it's understandable. Ms. Zalato.
Thanks. Is there currently a certificate of, I would presume there's a certificate of occupancy from building safety right now, right? Because people are living there.
There is-
Because I do know that some of the needed renovations are things like asbestos abatement and other things. So I guess making sure they're in the loop so that whatever it's going to take after M&O gets going, so that we can come back and have that certificate of occupancy reattached to the building, or if it's ever going to, in those renovations, detach from the building, that we're good to go. The other piece to that is talking with the planning department. There could be a change of use. We know it's already zoned for that, but whatever that process is that the municipality needs to engage in. And I know it's a little unfair for you all to have to be coordinating across these multiple departments. I suspect there will possibly by July be some changes that would help have some coordination for you in the new administration. But just as we're kind of keeping a punch list, these are the various pieces I was thinking through. The change of use came from the hotel conversions when those were done. And one of the things that had to be done at that time was we had to exempt hotel conversions from residential design standards. And what we would want to make sure is that that Title 21 use determination doesn't kick in some other requirement, or do we need to waive it as a policy matter? Thanks.
Others? Ms. Braga?
Well, I think Member Zolotel may have answered my question, but it seemed like there was a lot of renovation that was going on at Golden Lion prior to people being housed. So I was kind of like, well, what renovations are happening? But it's asbestos removal.
So the MLMP sale, or the way it's structured, is if it's going to have treatment center, and the way the old RFP was structured was that when we get that provider, if they need to make internal changes to the building to facilitate their treatment operations, we have some money for that. That's that remaining $5 million.
And further, there are some structural opportunities within, say, what was the restaurant space to use as a multi-purpose area, but it's going to have some substantial changes to make it function in a manner that supports the treatment environment. And there were previous discussions about the requirement that I don't think is a requirement to provide a detox space, which would have required an upgrade to a more hospital-like environment, a health clinic versus a treatment center, which is a health clinic, notwithstanding that, but a more substantial level of need would be required if detox. But we know that South Central has announced and broken ground on their new facility with increased detox, increased DET beds, and the kind of short-term evaluation and treatment opportunities that are coming into that space for people who are at the higher level of acuity. And so yesterday you heard me ask for a continuum of care kind of breakdown from Agnew Beck on our conversation regarding the alcohol tax designations, how we're going to use the alcohol tax, in part because we committed to a series of requirements under the consent decree, but we don't have to deliver them all. If they exist in the community, we can partner with those providers to meet that need. And so that can then make this facility be more focused on critical needs in the community that aren't currently being met within the rubric of the substance use environment, the various levels in the continuum of care under the ASAM placement criteria. So with that in mind, the idea is figure out what we have in the community, figure out what we don't have that fits within the consent decree, and then deliver an element or two that aren't currently being met that meet the terms so that we do our part to fulfill the citywide continuum.
And you're making those determinations with the RFI. Request for information.
I
is
think
that-
the RFI will provide us, and that was a request that we made as leadership working with the department, because we recognize going to the, and I should disclose, I work for a treatment provider. We will not be soliciting or providing a response to this because it's just not what we're doing right now. But just for the record to understand, I have experience in 25 years in the field. What the intent of the RFI was, we asked for it, is to get a survey, if you will, of the potential providers who might bid, have some interest, at the same time to have a conversation with those folks in a way that is supported by our Title VII or procurement code without violating any rules, that would provide an opportunity to hear in a feedback loop from the entities that might do the work, so that when we go to the RFP process, it's fully informed with where the community is at, as opposed to trying to do a shot in the dark, like what it felt like in 2021 that no one replied to because it just didn't meet the needs of the provider community. There wasn't an offerer. So the goal of the RFI is to shape the RFP in such a way that it can find an affirmative yes applicant that we find as a municipality qualified to do the work in a timely manner, because October 2025 will be here soon. So Anna?
Yeah, thanks. Kind of along those lines, I want to make sure that we're putting some context. So we talked about the MLMP sale, where this building came from and the requirements. I think it's also important to remember, and please correct me if any of this is incorrect. The conversation, if you wind back to 2018, 2019, a lot of conversation was focused on essentially rebuilding the Clitheroe Center. So different location, but out at the airport. And that is I think a city-owned facility, if I'm right. Yeah, it's a city-owned facility, but it's operated by, I think, Salvation Army. And of course, that program has relocated from that building, as I understand it, or there's intent to, yeah. And that building is aging. And so way back before the Golden Lion was on the table, the discussion was around basically a new Alaska Center for Treatment in that location. So I just want to mention that, not because that's being talked about now, but it's been this evolution. And I think it's also back when, and I think this is probably still true for a lot of the community, when you say treatment, they picture someone living 24/7 at the facility. And as Chris said, he mentioned the technical terms, right? But that higher intensity treatment, I don't think inpatient's the right word because that's a hospital, but really that level of treatment. But so I guess maybe we could unpack a little bit more, because I think we've talked about it, but I want to be really intentional so people outside of this room also understand when we say treatment, that can mean many different things. And I think that's partly what you guys are trying to figure out through this RFI. I also want to note the putting a request for information out before you design a new program or you make significant changes is a pretty standard practice. That's actually what the prior governor's administration did when looking at Medicaid reform. There was substantial. So really so it's good that we're doing this, because I think it does need to inform. But I guess I'm just curious if you guys could, health department folks could talk a little bit more about just at a real basic level, like what some different forms of treatment might be, how they would interact with that transitional housing piece. Again, not because those have been decided, but just kind of what are our options that are lower level than the full-on like inpatient highest level treatment or detox.
So I don't want to get into like too many specifics on that, because I think we really want to see what that community needs assessment or the continuum of care assessment comes up with in the RFIs. But for an example, having transitional housing in the Golden Lion, you could have that, and then basically outpatient treatment being provided in that facility. So, outpatient treatment, you're living in your own home or residence, and you're going to see maybe a substance misuse counselor or whatnot at their office. With the Golden Lion, what we have is an opportunity to have people in transitional housing who can then access that outpatient treatment in the same facility. So it's a lower level of care than, like you said, detox or inpatient treatment, or something where you might need to be in a hospital or a facility 24/7. But we have this opportunity to have it kind of co-located, which can, is a form of like permanent or of supportive housing, having those services there.
Yeah, and to add to, I think it also provides or could provide the ability to have that individual's family on site, provide that more family support network. And so not only is that individual receiving the care, but the family's receiving or can receive ways to be supportive once that individual and family are able to live independently. And so really making sure that they have all the tools and skills necessary to that when they are independent, that they are successful long-term.
And I'll just briefly add too, I totally recognize that the kind of what exactly it looks like is a question right now, and that's what needs to be answered through this process. But just to underscore, treatment can mean different things, it can mean different levels. And so what's contemplated there is not one specific modality. And I think we as a community have evolved our understanding of that. The other thing I'll just briefly note, I remember back in 2019, there was the health department under prior director, Natasha Pineda, completed a community needs assessment. And I know, of course, that data is at least 5 years old now. And unfortunately, a lot of those numbers are not going to be better after COVID, right? Because we know there was a lot of mental health and other impacts. But just to note, that's another place to look. But I agree that also the landscape has changed significantly. So I appreciate that you guys are looking at an update.
Other questions? So I have some information. I'm just looking one thing up real quick. So just a very brief discussion of the ASAM patient placement criteria. I think I would like to speak briefly to that. And so I grabbed for myself online a little cheat sheet because it's a kind of a fine level of information. So level 4 is inpatient level of care. And so that's truly hospitalization. That is medically managed inpatient treatment. And so people often confuse residential and inpatient. Inpatient is essentially in the hospital, whether it's a psychiatric hospital or a general hospital. That is where level 4 happens. And that is even often pre-detox. It is when someone is in an absolute crisis in their physical health and could die. So then there is the level 3 residential level of service, and it comes in at least 3 flavors. One is the 3.1, which is clinically managed low intensity residential. So you're in a residential setting, meaning at a place outside of your home, and you're getting a low intensity level of care, less than 20 hours a week of treatment services, groups, therapeutic opportunities. Then you have your clinically managed high intensity residential, which is the 3.5, which is 20 plus hours of therapy a week, and it's very intensely monitored. Then you have the 3.7, which is what most of us think of as detox, which is the medically managed residential treatment. And it is either in a hospital or in a clinic that looks and feels like a hospital when you're on the inside. It's staffed with a doctor, nursing practitioners, and I may have some of this wrong, but mostly I'll be right. So look it up if you need to quote me. So then level 2 is the either intensive outpatient or high intensity outpatient or medically managed intensive outpatient. So you have 2.1, 2.5, 2.7. Then at level 1, you have your long-term remission and monitoring after treatment. 1.5 is your basic outpatient, less than 20 hours of outpatient treatment, or you have your medically managed outpatient, which is going to have you're going to come into a clinic. You might have a medication assisted therapy, like an adjunctive therapy and some other items. So that's just the general spectrum of treatment services. It is my belief that the consent decree desires to have a 3-point level, the ASAM level 3 residential treatment service. And so of some sort, as Meg whispered in my ear. Now I have a professional value that I would like to see us innovate a new model. And that model is one based on a model that exists out of LA. Kathy Eisenhower is the lady who's created this program. It's called Shields for Families. And what they have done is create a program that has housing available, permanent housing even, and transitional as well, for families that stay together, integrated with their children and parents, usually mothers, who are in need of treatment services. And then they actually walk to a building very nearby for their treatment services. So they're able to keep housing instead of lose housing, at the same time get the treatment model. And so when you hear Kim and Tamai talk about some transitional housing and some residential beds, there is a possibility that we craft a model where I want to be careful how I say this. I want to say it's like Shields for people coming out of homelessness, but people who are vulnerable, who are unhoused, unstable, who are stuck in the addiction cycle, which is just a handful. It's not a handful. It's a meaningful group of the people that we see who are struggling. It could be an intervention targeted where they get a permanent housing unit and they are able to have funding that comes through a voucher that supports their rent and their treatment services, because HUD won't pay for and the Medicaid won't pay for housing when someone is in treatment. And so it's a way to bridge a funding gap and create a model that will unify funding streams to provide a protective system that will pay for itself and will keep people housed instead of moving them into vulnerability while they try to get stable. It's just counterintuitive to think about someone becoming homeless, which is what it is when you go into a residential program. You're not housed at that point. And some providers have had to keep people's housing units that they have secured coming out of the street-based homelessness or instability empty. So we have 2 beds in our community being used by one person. One is a treatment bed and one is that housing unit, but they're only in one because we don't want them when they finish their treatment to have no place to go, which would then put them right back into the place they were 2 steps before. So the theory is coming up with a new model that would help with reducing housing instability at the same time providing a treatment intervention. If we can square that circle, create a new model. I've joked about we're going to call ASAM and ask them to create the Anchorage level of care. And so that's kind of the principle in the conversation that we've been having of coming up with a new model. But the CFO will tell you, none of that matters. Build a building and get it operating. And so that's the first priority. And then the second priority is how do we make it the best? And then the third part is let's not duplicate what others are doing in the community. Instead, let's partner with those who are doing the work in the community so we increase the supports that are available and the opportunities. Karen, Meg, and then Anna.
So I'm hoping that whatever we come up with for the Center for Treatment, but when I personally know 10 families that have had to send a loved one to the lower 48, and they are not homeless, they're not welfare, they're hardworking people in our city that can't find the treatment for their young people that have gotten into trouble. And it's very frustrating. And I was really hoping that we're going to beef up that availability of treatment. And all of these people that I'm thinking of, their young person was not going to be treated at a stay at home, they needed like a residential type setting where they really intensively were working on this problem for their safety. So I hope we consider also thinking of that demographic.
So maybe I didn't communicate well. The theory of the shields is it's not you go somewhere far away. It's essentially, it is a residential level of treatment. It's just you have a housing unit and you're stabilized there and you walk next door to the next building. It's just not all in one space. So, and also, I don't think our program is going to focus on youth. Our program would be an adult-based program. And I think in our community, one of the main disconnects is people who have resources and assets don't generally choose a residential program in Alaska or Anchorage in particular, because the demographics of those who are in our treatment centers in Alaska are not the same of what people who have means would choose to send their family to. And so I know a lot of folks who will send their family out of state rather than choose one of the open beds available here for a number of reasons, which I'll be happy to discuss off the record.
I just want to clarify, when I'm 62 and youth means
All right, okay.
up to 30.
Yeah, okay. And that's fair. But in our community, you have residential programs for people 18 or 20 and younger, and then everyone else. But then some are better for 20 to 60, and then some are better for 60 and older. So I had Meg and then Anna.
Yeah, I just wanted to really telegraph for members that this is the opportunity, if there's something you're hoping to see in treatment or between now and when the RFI goes out, to communicate that with the health department, right? We, as leadership, we talked to them about our ideas and our familiarity, but we said this work session was really important so that the RFI reflects the policy direction of this body, so that when the RFP goes out and a contract comes forward to us, we're not having members go, hey, wait a minute, that's not what we wanted to see have happen. Partly because we are on such a short timeline and we only are going to have probably one go at this in reality. So as you think through it, I would really recommend that you reach out to Tamaya or and or Kim as well, if you just want to talk through what's required, even in the MLMP agreement. You can, of course, we can probably recirculate it, the consent decree from MLMP, if that's really how you want to get your information, or you happen to have insomnia. But this is really that opportunity to get briefed, and then the invitation, so that we make sure we get all the viewpoints on the table, so that when they go out for RFI, we're getting back useful information. Thanks.
Anna?
Yeah, a little bit more context, and then had a question. Yeah, I'm digging back to like the last kind of 11 years of my professional life, because I worked on really looking at not just in Anchorage, but and I'm not a behavioral health expert, and I have not worked as a provider in that field, but looking at basically how you address treatment needs across the state. And so, for example, in Kotzebue, there was discussion about, do we need to build a residential treatment center? And then I think one of the findings that comes when you dig into that over and over, and Chris talked about it as well, is really, again, that idea that intensive treatment can still happen as long as you have stable housing for the person, whether it's on site or somewhere else. Then of course there's transportation. And again, just making sure people are participating in that treatment, and that it's working, and that they feel like it's working. So I think that is one of the findings to think about, is that and it is somewhat less expensive, I think, per client, generally speaking, versus that kind of inpatient level of care, to have, so you can have something that's intensive outpatient treatment. That's actually a term. And then there have been studies in many communities around the state of what is feasible to do. A lot of tribal health organizations have looked into this, and the goal is to find places to keep people in the community as well. So that's, so you don't have to send people out of the state, or you don't have to send people to Anchorage if they want to stay in their home community and with their family. The second thing, just to note, I remember Shields brought me back to, I guess it was actually 12 years ago, 2012. Prior state administration, there was a fair amount of work on a Shields model. I was not part of that project, but Agnew-Beck worked on it. And so I think also just to note, there is a lot of prior, because we also are really great at doing things in fits and starts, and then they fizzle out every 4 years, right? And so there has been work on that. And I think that model was more of a traditional family with kids Shields model, but just to say those are out there, and I think those resources could be provided if asked of that firm. I don't work for Agnew-Beck anymore. And then lastly, I do have one question, and so I'm curious if this is something that is a decision, or if it's just something that'll be a question out, is so if there's transitional housing in this facility, and then there's treatment services, is outpatient services, for example, is it contemplated that somebody who is not living in that transitional housing would also be able to access or be a client of the treatment services? And I don't know if that's a decision that's been made, or if that's a question that'll go out.
Yeah, I think it's a question. Yeah, I don't think that an answer has been made on that. Yeah. And if I may, I'll just read briefly the 2-paragraph description of the model. The Exodus program, which is the program for Shields, accepts clients from throughout LA County. Although clients are primarily from Compton and Watts in South Central LA, the majority of clients are referred from the Department of Children and Family Services. Currently, approximately 45% of the clients are African American or Latina. The primary drug use of choice, cocaine, methamphetamine, with marijuana as the secondary drug of choice, and 100% of the clients are homeless at admission. Less than 30% have a high school diploma. Upon admission, they sign a contract for treatment services and a lease agreement for their housing. The building is 86 units. The complex, it's currently the only program in the U.S. allowing the entire family to live in the treatment environment with the individual. They provide individual family apartments, treatment, child development, youth services, case management, vocational services, all on site, with a maximum of 45 families are active in treatment at any given time. And after completion of treatment, which is a 12 to 24 month model, families are able to remain in the housing for a transitional period of up to a year, allowing for adequate time to develop vocational, educational, supportive services. And so it's a very interesting and intriguing model if you're thinking about the complex nature of the folks we've been cycling through all of our various systems, to have them commit, have them have a lease agreement, have some way to support the lease, because we have alternative funding so they can stay in as they become housing stable, get the treatment services they need, and the vocational service, all the things everyone talks about. There's a model for that. It just needs to be adjusted. And so that's my hope of what we really contemplate in this. I have no investment in Kathy Eisenhower's program. This is not because I have any ulterior motive other than I see what works and a missing opportunity in our town. So, and I really didn't schedule this work session to be a pitch session for that. I did it because Meg wanted us to do this. And so I blame her. Any other questions for folks? Nope. Any other thoughts? We had an hour and a half scheduled, but I don't think we're going to need it today. Oh, come on up, Alden. He volunteers to the mic. Wasn't even asked.
I just wanted to provide a couple of things, and I heard based on some of your questions, just to think about and so forth, that might be beneficial for Karen as we go through here. Asbestos was brought up, so that is something definitely to remember as we go through this process in that building and how we design it. The other thing that I would like I think the residents are currently living in the apartment side of it, but the kitchen area and the bar area and everything is that I think that's an area. There was a mention of whether we can have a certificate for occupation in there, and the answer is no. That's why they're also working on the structure. As you know, it's currently taped off because the assembly passed some money recently to fix I think it was the fire suppression system that had collapsed and was hanging down there and so forth. So there is a nice template there. I think it's a great idea to get some ideas on how to fix that up. You are correct. It's approximately 5 million-ish we need to spend by the end of the date. There is nothing in the requirement that says how many people have to be served or anything like that. So just says you're going to be providing this service. So if we got in a situation where maybe there was some remodeling that was required, we do need to spend the money for it, but they could transition. It doesn't have to be all 86 rooms used right away. You just have to have a program up and running. So there's nothing in the RCA thing that says this is the number of people you must serve. And it's very generic with regards to the breadth of services within these categories that you can do. If it's a benefit and so forth, I do have the 1-page RCA document that speaks to it. I could send it to the clerk and she could just forward it around to all of you so you can kind of read it. We do have, I think, a new city manager coming who was actually pretty instrumental in the MLP sale. So going forward on questions of interpretation in that section, I think we'll have a resource that will be able to, Becky was pretty involved in that process. So that's a good tool in person to be able to ask questions of as we go forward here.
Alden, let me just briefly interrupt. Did I miss you say that you're going to have an annotated version of the consent decree that we can read with analysis so that we can have a way to?
I don't know. I was just going to pass along the actual RCA document that the section of the document that refers to the treatment center and the $15 million requirement.
So while we can probably all read through it and understand it, it might be helpful to have a municipal attorney or assembly council do a little annotated read to send it out if there's any terms of art, terms of law that might be hard to interpret.
To my knowledge, we've been after that for 4 or 5 years, and every lawyer's taken a different perspective on what that means. So I think that would be, I even would want that. I mean, there's a lot, I mean, it's not specific enough to give direct, and it leads to interpretation. And we can probably certainly work towards that as we go forward. But I have actually had a lot of questions on, it's only like 3 paragraphs. And I even have interpreted it different ways than other people as we've gone through here. So, but like I mentioned, Becky would probably be a very good resource when she comes on to be able to provide some guidance. I think that's really important because getting a firm understanding of what the requirement is, in my opinion, is really important to determining what you're going to offer. You spend all this time and a lot of money, and then it doesn't actually qualify for what the intent of the language was, I think is the wrong way to go, which is why for years now I've been trying to have people firmly commit to what the language means. But I did want to just there is no, like I said, there's no minimum number of people. If we had one person in a program on that day and we'd spent $15 million, I think we would argue that we've met the requirement, even if we maybe were building it up at that point in time as we go through this. I think those are just some points I wanted to bring across here to start talking about. And I've obviously been pushing this for quite some time. We need to really get at it and hopefully find a use for that facility and the money. And just as a remember, as an alternative, which you'll read about, if we don't meet this requirement, there is a financial ramification to the city that we would prefer not to. And that's why it's such an important thing to be able to be focused on and not be reduced some revenues in the future because we didn't meet the certain requirement that's in there. So that's really important to know why this isn't. Glad the Assembly's picking this up and really moving this forward, and then making decisions to give enough time for the construction of whatever the plan is to take place. Get the vendor then up here some time to get either staffed or be in the building to be able to, when at the end of October of 25, be able to start offering some services that meet the requirements.
Anna, you
Yeah, just one more quick follow-up, because I know there's multiple steps in this process. So to the extent, and then we've got the October 29 or 25 2025 deadline. As far as you know right now, kind of what is the projected timeline? And you probably said it, but I just want to reiterate, getting the RFI out, what the turnaround time would be, et cetera.
So with the RFIs, we're working to get those out in July. And I think we want to make sure we give plenty of time for providers to, give us a lot of input on that. So we'll probably put those out for a month and a half to 2 months. And then after that, working through the RFP, I think our goal would be to have that out on the street in the fall. And again, because especially with a national push, have that out for a long amount of time, at least 8 weeks, if not longer, and then, go through the award process. The RFP will be going out with the construction or the capital improvement funding in it, but there isn't money in the budget right now to support an operator. So that may be something that we end up needing to negotiate and working with the Assembly on as well.
Thanks. So I guess what I'm hearing is that this process is going to move forward. And then, we'll see how it shakes out. We'll see how you guys end up designing the RFP, and then really anticipate a budget conversation in the fall, planning for next year for operations and maybe other capital expenditures that might be needed. And then really it's more kind of what this looks like and more specificity around how it operates and who's operating it is really going to be, at least sounds like, the spring, if not summer of next year.
Yeah, I would say winter or spring. The RFP, the proposals that come back should give us that specificity of at least what the providers propose. And, we can have the opportunity to negotiate as well if there's something that's not proposed that we identify as an extremely critical need. But I would say winter and spring and into spring is when we'll really have hopefully have a provider in place who's working with M&O to, get renovations done so that they can open and really know what is that going to look like? What are their operations going to look like?
Okay, thank you.
Meg.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alden first. Go ahead. Alden.
Meg can go first.
Okay. Meg.
2 points on that. And I think this is where, and we talked about this a little bit, is asking in the RFI for any call outs of potential operational funding needs or desires, so that when we walk into the 25 budget process while this RFP is live, we can already have that information. Back when the alcohol tax started, there had been a $500,000 set aside line item for the Alaska Center for Treatment, but since it never got going, we reappropriated that money and did other things with it. And so if we need to return to that, it would be good to know kind of, yes, we need to return, and at what amount. Secondarily, we spoke with Tamaya and the health department about including Providence in this conversation around the RFI and the RFP evaluation. Ultimately, we have to satisfy Providence, who intervened in the MLMP case and kind of made this a requirement for them to step away from objecting to that deal. So we need to make sure we're checking the boxes in the consent decree, but in such a way as that Providence is satisfied that that is occurring. And I think the best way to do that is to involve them. I highly doubt that they will be bidding to provide these services, because if they wanted to provide these services, they could have just provided these services. So, so just two additional pieces, I think, for our assurances that we're getting good information as we make policy decisions and we know we're on the right path. Thanks.
Anyone else?
And,
Alden?
and that's what triggered me as well here. The operational ongoing things. I would really hope that we look at this process where we get good feedback from the providers as they come forward on what is the way to get maximum operating dollars, because now is our opportunity to put the capital dollars into transforming the rooms and the buildings to ensure that they qualify for that maximum reimbursement to help this. I'm hopeful that it would be awesome if this could be a self-supporting kind of program going forward and not have to take it from municipal budgets to keep the facility operational. And I've had some conversations with different providers, and there are different levels of reimbursement, but they require you to be in a facility or in a room that has different things. So if that is indeed the case and it meets our requirements that we have, it would be nice to be able to design the facility with that in mind to maximize the per patient operational availability of that building going forward. The other reason is I'd rather do it before patients move in and get the asbestos issues dealt with than have to have the building up and running and then have construction going on during that time period. So if we plan this right and get it all taken care of in the right format, I think we'll be in good shape. I am concerned that, we're moving down this path. What if no one offers? And we've shrunk our time period down there and so forth. So if I'm hopeful that we go through this entire process and we find somebody, but I'm on the negative side of everything. I just hope that we actually have a provider and have an option and it'll all work out great. But if we're stuck in a situation where we don't, we could have some significant financial ramifications because of that. So I'm hoping we will be expeditious and have those answers sooner rather than later.
Karen, go ahead.
Thanks. I was wondering, so I know that was talk about Hennings is no longer going to be at the shelter. Are they contemplating not running Golden Lion either, and we're going to be needing a new provider there? Does anyone know what the status of that is? And then I think Alden said 86 rooms. Is it 86 individuals that are housed there, or what is the number of people that are at Golden Lion now for housing?
So at this time, we've had no indication from Henning that they would want to stop operating at the Golden Lion. They are operating essentially as a private landlord. So they have a master lease of the building, but there's not a different contractual relationship between the municipality and Henning in place. As we mentioned earlier, the master lease ends on June 30th and then goes to a month-to-month lease. So we'll be working through that process with real estate and Henning. Yes, there are 86 units. There are, I don't know the current number of residents, but there are over 86 because there are some units that have, multiple people in them.
By multiple, you mean couples, not like multiple.
Yeah,
Thank you.
couples.
Pairs. So, that's, so I just, so folks know as well, Meg and I have been in discussions about setting up a meeting with Ella Croft, who is the CEO of Providence, Alaska. So we'll be doing that as well, just to make sure they're looped in. Obviously, we've been having discussions with the transition group already, looking for staff, looking for other folks who can help with this conversation. So none of it's happening in a vacuum. All of it's starting to percolate all over the place. And I think the RFI will be the vehicle that will start to unite the conversation. Yeah, that's so just FYI. The RFI will be the way we start to get some unity.
Sunny, it's Friday.
Yeah, so if there's no one else, I'm going to offer that it is the weekend and go have it. So, and it's, as you heard, Juneteenth tomorrow. So folks, if you get a chance to go out to the park strip, be there. And thanks for the report and the caution, Alden, and the willingness to spend. We're adjourned.